Okay, good day, everyone. Let's get started. Welcome to the Millennium Water Alliance's very first global learning event. We're glad that you are all here. I am Keith Wright, the Executive Director of the Millennium Water Alliance. It's good to have MWA member staff joining this event from all around the world today. Over 2/3 of you are joining from outside North America, which is fantastic. That was part of our objective for this, was to involve more staff, not just from head offices, but from field offices of MWA members. So welcome to all. And we want to add those voices to our learning and collaboration as an MWA community. Today's event kicks off a regular series of MWA global learning events that MWA will convene for the staff of member organizations. And in this series, we'll draw on the expertise of our members, but also special guests and invited partners to explore the most important topics facing us and the sector. Our topic today is one of great interest about the localization of aid. And this is a priority topic for MWA members, and certainly a critical topic for both the WASH sector and the overall development community, and not just because donors are signaling an intent to fund more in that direction, but because it continues a trend that's been underway for years and has been contributing to more effective work and sustained results. That said, localization involves a wide range of factors and dynamics, not just the path and destination of funding, and it has both challenges and opportunities. And we're going to get into many of those aspects today. The localization of aid has major implications for how our work in the WASH sector is designed, how it's funded, how it's implemented. It gets at balances of power within global organizations and between international and local NGOs, between the development sector and government. And in my career of 30 years and counting, I've seen some significant shifts, and I would say improvements towards more effective activation of what we call localization. And that said, there's a lot more work to do. And I really hope that this conversation today will challenge your thinking and help you go back to your respective roles around the world, thinking a little bit differently and maybe exploring ways to move this forward in an even more effective way in the future. In fact, MWA's own decision to co-locate our global office between Washington, D.C. and Nairobi, Kenya is part of this overall trend towards localization. So today we'll get answers to many of your questions, probably not all of them, about what localization means to different stakeholders and what it looks like in practical terms. So we have a great panel to inform our discussions today, including representatives from donors, business, and implementers. And without further ado, it's my pleasure to introduce our moderator for today's event, June Samo. June is the Water Interventions Manager and Market Systems Specialist at MWA Kenya and has extensive experience working with a range of civil society, business, NGO, and government entities, which gives her a distinct perspective on today's topic. So over to you, June.
All right, thank you very much, Keith. And I am very, very happy to be moderating this very important and timely discussion. Thank you so much, everyone who's made the time to attend and participate. We really look forward to an interactive session, as I've said before. So, as Keith has mentioned, today we intend to unpack localization of aid. This is really not a new topic, as many of you will know, and actually it dates as far back as the 1960s. It's had very many different names in the past, including the indigenization of development, decolonization of aid, and the shifting of power in aid. But speaking from the perspective of a citizen of the Global South, the subject of localization is extremely important because if properly executed, localization could be one of the tools to propel development and economic growth in some of these countries. So the impetus to attain localization has really grown over the past years, of course, following the World Humanitarian Summit in 2016 and recent pronouncements by major donors to channel more of their funding towards localizing programming. But what does this look like exactly? Does localization stop at the transfer of funds to local governments and actors? Or does it touch on the more important aspects of who makes the decisions on how the funds are used? or does it challenge the current power relations in the aid sector? Does it include the more necessary aspects of building structures, building systems, developing capacity of local actors? And does it address the fears of donors and NGOs about the readiness of local actors and governments for localization? So this is an open conversation today. We will not shy away from discussing both the benefits of localization and the more difficult aspects of actualizing it. So we really encourage you to give us hard questions, because this panel is ready to field them so that you can go back to the field and be better actors. So to help us do this and to have this discussion, we have a panel of seasoned experts, seasoned WASH practitioners and thought leaders who are from NGOs, businesses, local governments, and donor organizations who will shed more light on this process of localization. But before I introduce the panel, I just want to go over some housekeeping and take you through the structure of the webinar. So this webinar, this learning event for today has been divided into two main sessions. We have the first session where we'll conduct a focused discussion with the panelists who will respond to a series of questions. Then this will be followed by an extended question and answer session where the panelists will answer questions posed by you, the participants. So we've deliberately tried to make the Q&A quite long to ensure that the audience really engages with the topic so that we can generate some real action on the ground. So I urge you to share your questions in the chat box as we move through the first session so that we can have a very smooth flow during the Q&A session. And then as you share these questions, please indicate your organization, give us your name, and also direct the questions to a specific panelist. It will be very, very helpful. So it's my great pleasure to now introduce our different panelists. So our first panelist is Ms. Portia Parsley, who is the Chief of the Global Strategy and Leadership Division at the Center for Water Security, Sanitation and Hygiene at USAID. Ms. Portia manages the US government's global water strategy and USAID's contributions to the Water for World Act. So we're very happy to have you here, Portia. Then our second panelist is Mr. Frank Bertelsberg, who is a senior humanitarian and cooperational professional with broad international experience. He is the current Deputy Regional Head for International Cooperation in the Horn of Africa at the Embassy of Switzerland in Nairobi, Kenya. Thank you, Frank, for gracing us. We shall also be talking to Lucian Blazer from Helvetas. Lucian is a WASH advisor who has been based in Haiti since 2017, where he has been assisting local programmers to pilot decentralization of WASH management and our WASH governance and strengthening program. And we look forward to your insights, Lucian. Then we also have a panelist from Save the Children, Mr. Steve Sarah. Steve is a senior WASH advisor leading WASH programming at Save the Children. He has over 10 years of experience in global health and international development. His work focuses on implementing WASH activities to support improvements in maternal, newborn, and child health across high-burden countries. So Steve, that's a good angle that you bring to this conversation, and we look forward to hearing it. Then our fifth panelist is Mr. Peter Macy, the co-founder of the global nonprofit Rock Blue, who are also co-organizers of this learning event. So thank you very much, Rock Blue. Peter has 4 decades of engineering and management experience in all aspects of water supply, sanitation, and wastewater. He has worked within and for numerous public utilities in developing countries, including utilities in Mozambique, utilities in Tanzania, Lesotho, Zambia, and Zimbabwe. So Peter, that's going to be a very good angle that you bring to this discussion. Of course, we had our last panelist, the Honorable Yusuf Gedi, who is the County Minister for Trade, Cooperatives, and Industrial Development in Wajir County, Kenya. He was going to really bring in the rich perspective of localization from the beneficiaries, but unfortunately, Yusuf could not be with us. Nonetheless, we still take the time to thank him for agreeing to participate, and we look forward to having him in future sessions. Before we embark on this very interesting discussion, I just want to thank our private sector partners. So the private sector partners of the Millennium Water Alliance who have sponsored this event quite generously. So we have been supported by Epicenter Africa, who have been providing sustainable power and water solutions across Africa for 12 years, with a focus in the arid and the semi-arid areas of the continent. They are a really good partner, and we look forward to their continued support. We also extend our gratitude to Boril Light and Water Kiosk. So Boril Light, in partnership with Water Kiosks, installs solar desalination units in off-grid areas. So these are areas, of course, where there's no electricity, there's no piped water, and these ensure that communities have access to affordable water and hygienic water as well for domestic and multiple use. All right, so without further ado, I think we can kick things off. So my first set of questions will be directed to the donor agency representatives. That's Portia, and that's Frank from SPC. So Portia, could you please tell us how USAID is defining localization and what you expect to see as outcomes over time? We would also like to really understand why localization is currently so important for USAID. Over to you, Portia.
Thank you, June, for that question, and thank you, MWA, for organizing this event. I think that we as a sector are at an important point. It's pivotal as we really switch and have a very specific focus on localization. It's a time for knowledge exchange and asking each other tough questions, because I think there are incredible benefits that are clear to all, but there are some very real technical and operational challenges for us as a sector and as a community to really dialogue and understand. So I'm looking forward to the questions, but I'm also looking forward to hearing from the folks who are participating in this session, because I think I've got a lot to learn from their experience as well. So thank you for the invitation. And now to answer your question. So for those who may not be aware, in November of last year, 2021, USAID Administrator Samantha Power gave a powerful speech at Georgetown University, where she outlined a new vision for global development. In that speech, the administrator made clear that USAID has made a commitment globally to locally led development and promoting meaningful partnerships with host country governments and institutions. During that speech, she noted that it was critical for USAID to engage more frequently and more intensely and more sustainably with a broader range of partners. Put simply, USAID understands that local partners offer a scale that no single development agency can truly reach on its own. So with that understanding, USAID is now working actively to lower barriers for these types of organizations and institutions to really join our mission. So for us at USAID, localization is defined as intentional changes to our policies, our processes, our staffing, and our funding decisions to support partnerships and programs that equitably empower local actors, strengthen local systems, and facilitate local leadership so that development and humanitarian assistance is both more effective and sustainable. Why is USAID making that commitment? Well, we know that when we partner with local NGOs and businesses, we have the opportunity to double our impact. So it's not just about managing a project to deliver results. That's important. But this is really also about staying long after USAID and its funding dollars are gone. So just a little bit about where awards and money is currently going at USAID. If you didn't already know, as of 2017, 60% of USAID assistance was awarded to just 25 partners. Currently, the agency has about a 6% rate of awards to local partners. So we've got a long way to go. Why? Why do we lean so heavily on our these 25 core partners? Well, just being honest, it's hard to work with local partners. It takes time, and it includes risks for both the local partner to take on this added responsibility and for the agency. Do we have the capacity to deliver the support that a new local partner really needs? Local partners often lack the accounting expertise that our USAID mechanisms require. I think for anybody who's worked on a USAID activity, whether as a prime or as a sub-awardee or subcontractor, you know that we have so many standard provisions and rules, and it's complicated to get up to speed on how to manage your award, much less deliver on the technical requirement that the award is hoping to accomplish. Our local partners may lack even the legal counsel needed to really thoughtfully sort through a contract or award, which can often run, up to 100 pages long. So just to be clear, it's hard but important that we really begin to dig in and figure out how we can make this shift. In terms of expected results from this commitment to localization, the administrator has set a very clear goal for USAID. Moving forward, the agency is going to provide at least a quarter or 25% of our funds directly to local partners over the course of the next 4 years. To support the administrative management burden that we place on missions in order to reach this 25% goal, USAID is working actively on expanding the authorization for our local staff members, what we call our foreign service nationals, so that they can play a larger role in both the awarding of mechanisms and the management of those mechanisms. And in my opinion, honestly, that's been a long time coming. So to me, this is as important and valuable of an outcome of the localization agenda as the work with local partners. I think it's really important to think about and understand that this localization agenda has the opportunity to empower and strengthen capacity both internally at USAID and externally. So a little bit about what we are doing in the WASH sector to support this pivot. We are hard at work internally to think about ways and put in place mechanisms to really strengthen and support our USAID WASH leads who are working out in our field missions so that they're able to build their technical and operational capacity to manage activities. First, we are focused on strengthening technical capacity. In January of 2022, we launched with our expanded WASH team that cuts across RFS, Global Health Bureau, and our Africa Bureau. We've got WASH practitioners across the agency, and we work as an expanded team. So together we launched a continuous learning series. So over the course of 8 weeks, WASH leads are able to participate in a technical seminar, which outlines the evidence and key approaches for a certain technical sector. For example, WASH in healthcare facilities or water resources management. So they are able to attend an in-depth technical seminar, and over the course of 8 weeks, there's a series of smaller group sessions where they're able to sort of exchange information and real life examples to share how they've implemented approaches and the sets of interventions they've used to result in the desired outcomes. And there's also sessions that are focused on doing exercises so folks have the opportunity to learn how to put in practice those approaches and interventions. So we are committed and we have a plan to strengthen WASH expertise across the agency. Second, we are focused on enabling professional growth and advancement for our field colleagues. Last year, we developed a set of standard position descriptions, which on the face of it may not seem as powerful as you might understand external to the agency. But having those preset standard positions saves missions both time and effort when they are ready to recruit WASH leads. So it enables them to fill those positions faster, and it enables them to recruit positions at higher grades. And that really creates an opportunity for advancement and empowerment for our WASH practitioners who are really at the forefront of leading our engagement and working with our local partners. So zooming back out, I'd like to answer the question of why localization is important at USAID. And honestly, in the words of Administrator Power, if we really want to make aid inclusive, local voices need to be at the center of everything that we do. And I'll just wrap up and share a little bit about how we are going about sort of implementing the localization agenda and what USAID is planning to do. First, we're going to set aside dedicated funding to support agency local systems practice and people really understanding what it means to work in a local system. Second, we're going to develop and release a guide on systems practice and monitoring, evaluation, and learning. We're also working to establish a system or network of mentors and coaches across missions and bureaus here in Washington. The agency is also going to revise its program cycle guidance, which is available publicly to all in our automated directive system. That's chapter 201. And the focus of that revision will really be to reestablish the importance of sustainability and system strengthening as programming priorities. The agency will be working on creating an online toolkit of system resources, and it aims to designate a coordinator at the agency level that will really lead on sustainability and local systems practice. The agency is also looking to develop a set of basic system principles that it will use to frame this work. And that's a little bit about what the agency is doing, why localization is important, and why I'm so pleased to be part of this conversation. Thank you, June.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Portia. That's extremely insightful. And I think something that particularly stood out for me is the fact that you admitted that while it's a challenging thing, it's not easy, it's definitely something worth doing because that's how sustainable change is actually brought about. We'll obviously unpack this a bit later, but it's very good to hear that USAID has dedicated funding to help actors within USAID to understand localization and to strengthen capacity. So it's not just a one-way street of building capacity of the locals, but also capacity of the implementing INGOs to understand that. So that's great. Thank you so much, Portia. We'll come back to you in the Q&A. So now moving to Frank from SDC, we've really just heard from Portia on how USAID is tackling localization and why it's important for them. Having personally worked with SDC, we understand that the private sector and private sector engagement is a key tenet of how SDC operates. So because SDC has been prioritizing the role of the private sector in much of your resilience work, how do you see this linking with localization, and why is it a priority for SDC? Please just tell us a bit more about this.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much once again to Keith and the entire team for having me on this panel. It came as a nice surprise. It's a great audience that I'm offered here. So that's fantastic. Maybe one word before I come to your question. Where does SDC come from? Some of you might remember that during the grand bargain process, there was this work stream localization, and it was headed by two entities. One entity was the IFRC, and the other entity was Switzerland, and that is probably one of the reasons why this topic remains so high on our agendas until today. To understand why localization, private sector, resilience, and all these things, they play into each other, why that is so important for us, I give you a perspective from here, from the Horn of Africa, where I'm based in Nairobi, where our key clients of our regional cooperation program 22-25 are pastoral and agro-pastoral communities and displaced people, as well as minorities, who all live in the dry lands of Somalia, southeastern Ethiopia, and northeastern Kenya. These borderlands between Somalia, Kenya, and Ethiopia, they are amongst the most neglected in the region of the Horn of Africa. These people are marginalized, they are away from urban centers with few services, and often therefore very vulnerable. They face multiple shocks, just as now, but also before in 2011, 2017, we had droughts. Now we have another one. And that is followed by extreme water shortages, food security, animal diseases or death, huge numbers of livestock death that we are facing here at the moment. So strengthening the resilience of these communities, that is really the top of SDC's agenda, at least mine here, but I know of many of my colleagues in other parts of the world where similar conditions exist. They also work then very closely with private sector actors. But not to lose my red thread here. The point is that development cooperation alone, and this we all know, is not enough. So the private sector has a decisive role to play, even in remote areas. They have the innovative power to achieve transformational resilience. And that is exactly what we are aiming at, a transformative approach. Private sector brings in own resources, which then leverages what SDC is able to give, and therefore combined forces to reduce poverty and become more effectively in what we deliver. Let's also not forget that 9 out of 10 jobs are created in the private sector. Our vision, therefore, is that in the hopefully not so far future, agro-pastoral communities in the Horn of Africa increasingly interact with markets that provide them with jobs, income, and access to services, including financial, health, and education services. So Our strong declared goal for the future here in the Horn is, for example, that we embed or factor in private sector work, private sector engagement, private sector development across all the domains that we are working in. And these are four. We work in governance, we work in health, we work in migration/protection, and then also, of course, in food security. Let me give you a few examples of where we already engage with the private sector right now. We have, for example, the RAPID program here in Kenya, together with, of course, not together, but we're also on board the we, and it's a program, Millennium Water, Millennium Water Alliance. We have there a local partner, a local private sector partner called Maji Milele. These guys are using smart meter technologies for water. The advantage is you have no wastage of water. There's no queuing. These are good examples where things have worked. We all know about the difficulties and of incapabilities or incapacities of many actors, but with Maji Milele, I would say that's a proven relationship. And here I heard earlier, Epicenter Africa has sponsored this event. Also, Epicenter Africa is on board of the RAPID program. It does operation and maintenance of water utilities, including spare parts and trainings. That's not, these are just little examples, and I haven't gone to depth now about this engagement with the private sector, but we have a different kind of engagement and a different mechanism of engaging with the private sector here. SDC also funds so-called social impact incentive programs, SYNC. And these are a funding instrument, for those who may not have heard of it, that reward enterprises with premium payments for achieving social or environmental impact. And then, of course, the additional revenues that they will receive enable them to improve profitability and also attract investment to scale. Names, maybe two examples. There is Access Afia. Access Afia is affordable or provides affordable healthcare services through a chain of low-cost primary healthcare clinics, pharmacies, but also online consultations, and has already served up to today 300,000 patients. And it has also grown in presence, and 15 clinics are now existing in 4 counties of Kenya. And I think really these institutions at the periphery, not in the urban centers, they make a difference. And that is the connector, and I haven't said it and emphasized it enough, that's the connector between the private sector and attracting the private sector into the provinces, into the counties, and so on and so forth. Farmers' Pride is another one. It also transforms informal agro dealers into commercially viable enterprises. Maybe to something different, we are currently building a regional livestock program, and now you will ask yourself, okay, why is he talking about regional livestock program if we are talking about localization here? We hope that all this experience with the private sector actors so far here, that this will feed into the design of this 12-year program, which aims to promote local markets and businesses through the establishment of livestock corridors that link Somalia, Kenya, and Ethiopia. We will tackle initially 4 such corridors, and maybe we go up to 9 with several partners, as I say, in 3 countries. Such endeavors across borders, and even if it's called regional, they will not work without the local markets. And there is a big disconnect between the local market, the regional market, and even the above regional market. Very close to the Horn of Africa, we have the Gulf states. Even today, there is already good business ongoing, but there's this total disconnect between the local, the national, and the regional level. And we think that with the regional livestock program, we can connect the dots here, strengthen local markets, go further and deeper into market sector development approaches, market system development approaches, I'm sorry, and thereby feed into economies that reach better scale than what we see now in the Horn of Africa. I stop here. Thank you.
All right, Frank, thank you so much for that. There's some things that I've picked up from what you've described in terms of the institutions at the periphery being very important in making a difference. I think that's very important for us to consider. And even when you put the private sector in that context, when you have these institutions, these private sector institutions that, serve marginalized communities, it's very important to support them and build their capacity. So even localization, as you apply localization to the local NGOs and the local partners, you also need to think about these peripheral private sector entities that are working within these marginalized regions, because it's almost as if you'll be doing localization halfway if you don't consider the market and you don't consider the private sector players. So thank you, Frank. I will definitely get into a bit of the regional livestock program. And just to say that localization spans across all sectors, so that's also quite relevant, and we'll come to discuss that. Thank you so much, Frank, and thank you, Portia. It's good to get the perspective of the donors and how they want to influence localization. So now we're actually going to move into the implementers. These are the INGOs, and it's very good that we have Helvetas and Save the Children here. So I'm moving over to you, Steve and Lucian. So my question to the both of you is that, how is localization currently being used in your work? How is, for example, Save the Children implementing localization across the different sectors? What are the new methods you're trying to implement? What are the changes in where decisions are made, and what are the outcomes that you're seeing? So I'll ask Steve, Sarah of Save the Children to go first, and then we'll move to Lucian from Helvetas. Over to you, Steve.
Sure, thanks. And thanks for having me on the panel. First, I just wanted to say that we were hoping to have some of our other team members from regional offices represent us, but they're actually deployed to Ukraine at the moment. So you guys are stuck with me, but I collected a lot of feedback from our global team. So I'll just sort of like present out on what we've been discussing as a team and an agency. First, one of the points that we have talked a lot about is that as a global, complex and multi-sectoral organization, we have to ensure that these principles of localization and these commitments are represented and have buy-in at every echelon of the organization. So I think it's worth noting that within our current 3-year strategy, shifting power and local or national partnerships are key enabling factors that we've identified that will allow us as an organization across technical areas and sectors to meet our strategic objectives to ensure that children survive and thrive, that they're protected, and that they receive a quality education. We also identified as an organization 7 principles or commitments for localization. And I'm not going to go through all of them, but our team thought it was important to highlight 3 of them. One is that we inherently believe that by strengthening local authorities and civil society at national level, we'll be able to enhance sustainable accountability for child rights. And therefore, doing this work is just inherently part of doing good quality work for children. The second thing is that internally to Save the Children, we've started to shift our power and capacity to national and regional offices. So this includes technical capacity, of course, but it also includes a lot more decision-making responsibilities and decision-making protocols that lie with our country offices instead of those offices like the US that raise most of the money for the movement. And it also includes shifting budget and award management responsibilities and compliance and reporting responsibilities for donors to our country and regional teams. And we've had a lot of success in doing that. I'm not going to say there hasn't been challenges, but it's gone, I think, smoother than we had anticipated. The other thing I wanted to mention is around funding, because money does talk. And as an organization, we committed to the grand bargain commitment that was already referenced to transferring at least 25% of our our direct activity funding to national partners. And on top of that, we've committed to transferring an additional 10% of unrestricted funding to those partners to ensure that they have greater coverage of their overhead costs, which they need just to operate, and to provide them a little bit of extra flexible funding so that they can make decisions to build their own capacity as an organization in ways that they see fit. We aren't at those targets across all of our programs yet, but we are quickly climbing in progress towards those funding targets. And some of our programs and some of our country offices have already started to meet those targets. The second large point I wanted to make was just around what our WASH team is doing, because it's more relevant for this audience. One of the things that we've been able to control is where our technical assistance sits and who is providing that technical assistance. So for Save the Children's whole existence, I think we've had WASH advisors in the global agency, but even our regional and country representatives were often expats or people who didn't come from those regions. So that's been a big focus for our team, is shifting those positions to be regionally and nationally based, and to fill those positions with people who are from those countries and regions. And so right now, all of our regional office advisors are fully staffed, and all of those people are representing or working in regions that they come from. And the same is true for all of our country advisors as well. The second thing that we've done is we've always had this technical working group for WASH across the agency, and that group has realigned itself and all of its priorities to focus centrally on capacity strengthening and working with local partners to build their capacity. So whereas in the past we had worked on specific technical topics like monitoring and evaluation for WASH, or how to integrate WASH and nutrition, we are now focused more broadly on how to build our country office technical capacity and leadership in specific strategic WASH priorities for us, but also how we can work with local organizations and allow them to do the WASH work under awards that Save the Children is leading, with minimal oversight or engagement from Save the Children. And the last thing I wanted to mention is that this is a little out of left field, but in November of last year, a historian in the UK published a book on Save the Children's history. And the perspective is one that intertwines Save the Children's founding and existence with imperialism and colonialism. And it sort of uses Save the Children as an example, I think, for the international development sector on how our history and our perspective as an organization is intertwined with colonialism and imperialism. And it's, especially for someone who works at Save the Children, it's sort of a hard read, but it's also, once you read it, I think a little bit obvious. And it's something that we've started to confront openly within the organization. There's a lot of discussions happening. We had the author come and talk to our global team in several different sessions so that anyone from the global agency could attend. And I think as an organization, our leadership is trying hard to have us all reckon with our collective past as an organization and within the high income societies that have traditionally held all the power within our movement. And so we're trying to come up with good recommendations on how to reorganize the organization and shift that power to our country teams so that they're empowered to make better decisions for their context. I'll stop there. Thanks.
All right. Thank you very much, Steve. First of all, I just want to say to Save the Children and all the organizations that are in Ukraine, thank you for the noble work you're doing. Our hearts and minds are with you and with the people of Ukraine. So that's okay. Your colleagues are doing good work, and thank you for representing them well. Second, I really get a sense of earnestness. And I really thank you for raising the comment from left field, because it's such comments that move the discussions forward. So thank you, Steve, for that. Actually, when I was reading about localization, there was this phrase that came: a change in mindset and new ways of working does not happen overnight. However, for power to shift, there needs to be a conscious letting go by those who have had a tight grip on power. And this requires courage and considerable adjustments to mindset, systems, and structures. So what's happening in Save the Children is really, really important, and it's hard. I have to tell you that, but it's necessary, and we applaud you for doing that. So we're going to ask more questions. Thanks for putting that out there. It's very interesting. Enter. So over to Lucian Blazer. We just want to hear what's happening in Haiti and what Helvetas is doing about, implementing localization. So over to you, Lucian.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for having me on this panel. I'm really glad to be here. So as I said, I'm going to say a few words on what we do on localization, especially in Haiti. So Helvetas is an international organization working in over nearly 40 countries across the globe, and in different subjects, not only water and sanitation. And in our general approaches, we really have one key element, which is the systems approach, market systems approach, which we also apply to the water and sanitation sector. In Haiti, Helvetas is present for over 30 years, including in the water and sanitation sector. And currently, we are working really on this move towards making the water and sanitation system work. So the systemic approach here in Haiti. Since 2017, we are implementing an SDC-funded program, which is called the REGLO, and which stands for Reinforcing Governance of Local Water and Sanitation Services. We implement this program jointly with local systems actors, such as the National Directorate for Drinking Water and Sanitation, known as the DINEPA, the Ministry of Interior, and currently 4 municipalities in the South Department of Haiti. One keyword of this approach we are implementing is to put local actors in the driver's seat. So we see ourselves as external actor of the system, and we seek to strengthen local actors. I mentioned public actors, but we also work with private and civil society actors, which are part of this system. And yeah, one key actor we try to strengthen in this context of Haiti, which is a context of centralization. A lot of power is concentrated within DINEPA, although the sector reform and the sector law foresees to delegate these responsibilities to the municipalities. So the municipalities are really one of the key actors of the system, which has to take on new roles and change their function to make the system work. In 2017, Helvetas, we started to work with the local and national actors to design and to articulate a vision towards change in the water sector, according to this sector law and reform. And in 2018, we started to launch a pilot together with our partners, with our local partners, in 4 municipalities, as I mentioned before. So as a complement to what I'm saying, we asked the mayor of one of the municipality we are working with to share our experience with this program and which difference it has made in our municipality. So we wanted to give this perspective from one of our partners of what we are doing. So I would suggest that we listen to what she has to say.
Bonsoir tout le monde. Donc, ça me fait grand plaisir d'être avec vous cet après-midi, de présenter la commune de la Vallée et parler un peu du défi de l'eau sur la commune et où est-ce qu'on était, où est-ce qu'on est et les perspectives qu'on a pour ce secteur-là, le secteur de l'eau et de l'assainissement. Pour commencer, on a eu le renforcement des cadres de la mairie. N'oubliez pas, le programme Réglossé, renforcement de la gouvernance locale, de l'eau et de l'assainissement. Donc, on a commencé avec le renforcement des cadres de la mairie, le renforcement aussi des maires et le renforcement aussi des CASEC, des autorités locales, parce que c'est un programme qui allait impliquer toute la communauté, qui allait impliquer les OSC, les autorités locales, tous les groupes organisés de la société civile. L'ancien système qu'on avait eu sur la commune est financé par le plan de parrainage qui n'a pas même duré 5 ans. Donc, c'est surtout le mauvais travail était fait, c'est parce qu'il n'y avait pas vraiment l'implication des autorités locales, j'avais évoqué ça, il n'y avait pas la participation de la communauté. Et donc, c'est un problème, ça a permis que la construction n'a pas pu durer. Mais avec notre implication, suivant le programme Réglo même, qui est le renforcement de la gouvernance locale, donc qui nous renforce, qui nous implique, et toute la communauté est impliquée. Donc, c'est ces travaux-là que je viens de citer, c'est des travaux qui se font avec la communauté. Il y a la loi 4 de la DINEPA aussi, la loi de mai 2009, qui fait mention pour les municipalités d'être dans le temps de devenir des maîtres d'ouvrage. Donc, avec le projet Réglo qui travaille avec nous, et ça nous apporte les ABC de la maîtrise d'ouvrage. Donc, c'est ce travail-là que fait Réglo avec nous et les municipalités, avec la communauté aussi. Donc, arriver à maturité, donc on pourra faire un projet, d'exécuter un projet et de grande envergure sur la commune, sur la question de l'eau et de l'assainissement. Et puis, ça nous donne déjà un autre atout pour les autres projets qu'on aura. C'est pas seulement pour l'eau et potable et de l'assainissement. Il y a autre chose encore, il y a une unité EPA. C'est l'unité eau potable et assainissement qui est créée. Il n'y avait pas ça dans le temps, qui est créée et avec le programme Réglo. Tous les travaux qui se font dans le programme se font avec l'implication, la participation de l'unité EPA. Et c'est même l'unité EPA qui s'en charge de l'exécution avec la firme, avec Helvetas, et qui nous donne l'appui technique, avec la DINEPA qui donne l'appui technique. Mais l'unité EPA, il est le centre, il est le point central même des travaux qui se font au niveau de la commune. Entre-temps, on a un autre travail, on a un autre ouvrage, infrastructure d'eau potable, qui se fait avec la DINEPA, avec le financement de la Banque mondiale. D'où la DINEPA a jugé très, très important d'impliquer la mairie. Tout ce qui se fait avec le projet, ce grand projet-là, qui n'est pas de Helvetas, qui n'est pas du programme Réglo, mais le programme Réglo, parce que le programme Réglo, on travaille avec la DINEPA, on travaille avec l'Orepacid. Donc, ça a permis, ce projet-là, l'autre projet qu'on a, donc ça leur a permis d'intégrer la mairie dans ces travaux, de consulter la mairie au jour le jour. Donc, la mairie participe normalement et dans l'exécution de ces travaux-là, d'où l'importance pour voir que on avance vers la maîtrise d'ouvrage. Arrivé un moment, il y aura la DINEPA sera toujours le régulateur, mais pour la maîtrise d'ouvrage, on passera par les municipalités. Les attentes étaient grandes et oui, elles étaient grandes. Au début de la phase 0, je voyais qu'il y avait une certaine lenteur. On se plaignait. Donc, l'équipe de la mairie, on se plaignait. Les autres mairies aussi, quand on parlait, on dit, mais ça fait longtemps que Helvetas est sur la commune et on avance, il y a des formations, 1 an est passé, rien n'est fait, mais quand même, et ça va passer, rien n'est fait. Mais de nos jours, maintenant, je comprends pourquoi on n'était pas allé aussi rapide. Donc, il fallait mettre du temps vraiment. Il fallait impliquer, il fallait informer la communauté pour la réussite du projet. Donc l'attente est comblée. Et au début, j'étais un peu essoufflée pour voir et faire des ouvrages, des projets, des structures sur tout le territoire. Mais quand même, j'avais pas pensé au volet de pérennité et d'implication, mais quand même avec l'approche et arriver là, après on est à la 3e année, arriver là où nous sommes, il y avait raison vraiment de prendre du temps, de sensibiliser, de mettre tout en œuvre et pour que les travaux qui se font, il y a des personnes qui sont formées, les ouvrages sont là, il y a des personnes qui sont formées, il y a la population qui est informée.
All right. Lishan, is there anything else that you want to add?
Oh, thanks a lot. I think we will have the opportunity to come back in the Q&A.
All right.
So over to you.
Okay. Thank you very much. It's very interesting. I think the things that I took out of that video is that she mentioned that the longevity of reform is clear. So the previous system that was built only lasted 5 years, but there's the expectation that this system will last longer. And so then you can see that if you have a localized approach, involving local actors, your reforms are sustainable, they're embedded, and they last for longer. But also as a counterpoint, and this is a very interesting video, I think we'll unpack it in the Q&A, is that she mentioned she wanted to see the infrastructure coming up immediately instead of waiting for the community to be informed, for people to be trained. And at the beginning, it didn't make sense to her, but now she sees why it's important that you took your time, you involved the local partners, and you co-developed the infrastructure. So that's definitely a question I'm going to direct at you. Thank you for the video, and it really shows the good work that Helvitas is doing. Thank you, Lushan. All right, so this is to our last panelist. We are taking it from a different angle. We're turning to Peter Macy of Rock Blue, who works with businesses and local utilities, which are very important stakeholders in the localization agenda. These are the people who can be said to be the recipients, for lack of a better word, of localization. They're actually the recipients because localization is done together. So Peter, thank you first of all for helping us to co-organize this event. So the question to you is, what are some of the ways that Rock Blue's working model differs from traditional humanitarian WASH programs? Just when you give your response, focus on elements of localization in your model as Rock Blue, and whether there have been any challenges in implementing the model and how you overcome that. So over to you, Peter.
June, thank you very much. Thank you to the Millennium Water Alliance and to all the panelists. I learned a great deal from everyone already in this call. So what's different about our model? Well, our model is almost 100% local. In fact, it is all local. We have a US-based nonprofit, and then we have a locally based nonprofit in South Africa, and everything basically is done locally. What we do is we provide mentoring, capacity building with senior management of water service providers. That's all we do. We just work with the senior management of water service providers in 6 countries, and these are providers that are providing water to 22 million people, over 22 million people. So there's a lot of responsibility on their shoulders, hence on our shoulders. What's different about our model? I'm not sure all of it is different, but I'll explain to you some of the things that are what we consider fairly unique. One is that we're able to offer our partners, these water service providers, a lifetime commitment to work with them. So it's not 2 years, 5 years, not project-based. It's a lifetime commitment to work with them. And so the way we've structured our model makes it possible to do that. And so they and their partners know that unless they want us to leave, we're always there. We can always provide assistance. Any assistance that comes from the home office is done virtually. So we have a highly virtual model with a local presence. So we've got local resident representatives, but anything that comes abroad is all done virtually. What does that do? That minimizes our footprint so that the majority of the responsibility and the ownership is still with our local partners. And it also decreases the cost of the work that we do, obviously, if we have that low footprint virtual model. We decided that we needed to have the capability within our organization to raise money for our partners. So whether it's a large utility that serves 17 million, like in Ghana with GWCL, or a smaller utility in Zimbabwe that serves 100,000 people, we felt that we needed the capability to help them raise funds. So we formed something called a Acorn Initiative. I can talk about that later. We studiously avoid doing work that the private sector could do because we want to build up the private sector. We want the private sector to be very strong. So we're a nonprofit, and we're working collaboratively with these water service providers. And there is the temptation that they come to us and they say, well, you have all these specialists. We have a roster of 138 specialists. For them to come to us and say, you know, we'd like them to design this or do this study. And our response is, we're just helping you on the capacity building. And we don't want to put the private sector out of business. So we'll help you engage with the private sector. We may even help you find money to pay for the private sector, but we're not going to do the work of the private sector because we want to build up both the local and the international private sector. We have what's called a freemium model. So we offer our services for free to a certain degree. 24 hours per month is free, and beyond that, they need to pay for services. We did that because we want them to, our partners, not to have any sort of barriers to seeking support from Rock Blue. So we have that freemium model. None of it is easy. It takes this model takes a little bit more time, a little bit more capacity building, a little bit more patience. A virtual model is difficult to build up trust because you're working over a Zoom connection or something similar. And so one of the ways we mitigated that was by having local resident representatives. They're sort of like the bridge between the virtual assistant and our partners locally, these local resident representatives that we have. We are working with public employees. These are with water service providers. They have enormous challenges, and they don't always have the staffing, the numbers, or the capacity that is required to take on what they've been asked to do. And what we say is we did this study that came up with something that we called the 19 challenges that they uniquely face in the developing world that in the developed world we don't face. And yet we're still asking them to provide service to their community as much as we would if they were in, say, Munich or New York or London. So we're helping them to overcome those challenges with a lot of capacity building and a lot of patience. One of the things we set up within this NGO, Rock Blue, is we set up like a consultancy within the NGO. So if they need our services, paid services beyond the freemium model, they can still access those services. We didn't want them to have to go out externally to get this, but they could do it rapidly through Rock Blue, through what we call the Rock Blue Consultancy. It's still nestled within the NGO of Rock Blue, but because it's within the NGO, we can't earn a profit. And so therefore the cost that we can offer them is still inexpensive. Obviously they want to get as much as they can for free, but if they're paying for services, those costs are going to be very low. Trying to think what else. The model that we have, one of the challenges that we have, because we're working directly with these water service providers and not necessarily with a USAID or a CETA or a World Bank, is we don't have the same access to funding that we would if we work directly with USAID or others. So what do? We need funding, they need funding. So we just get very creative on different ways of bringing them money and different ways of bringing money into our organization so that we can support them. It just takes more creativity, a little bit more time, but there's a lot of resources out there. There's corporate funding, there's individual funding, there's foundational funding. There is having independent contracts through our Rock Blue consultancy to bring in funding. Where it's particularly challenging is in countries like Zimbabwe, where they have economic political sanctions. And so the access to money for our partners there is obviously more limited. So we have to be even more creative. It doesn't mean that the funding's not there. It actually is, but it just means that you have to go to more non-traditional sources for that funding. So June, I'll stop there and together with the panelists, answer any questions that come from the attendees.
All right, Peter, thank you very much for that. I think the Rock Blue model is quite interesting, and personally, my background is a little bit in water utilities and supply, so I quite understand how utilities, especially in the developing world, are encumbered with unique problems. Something that you mentioned that Rock Blue did that's quite interesting is the 19 challenges you talked about, which are challenges that are unique to utilities in the developing world compared to the developed world. And I think you've brought out an aspect of localization known as nuance. Localization is different in different contexts. It will take on different forms. And so then even as implementing partners, NGOs, INGOs, and donors are trying to tackle it, they really need to understand that it can't be one solution for everything. So that's a really good way that you are approaching this. And thank you for flagging that. So to everyone, thank you so much for listening, and to the panelists, thank you for these very insightful answers and observations. So we're going into our second session, which is the question and answer session. And I encourage our participants to continue putting questions in the Q&A box, and they'll be answered by our panelists as we go along, or I can just direct them directly to the panelists. So on to the questions. So our first question actually goes to Portia of USAID. The question is, how do you see these shifts in definitions of localization and priorities affecting global NGOs and development contractors? Because it's a shift from the way people are used to working. We're actually asking for systemic change. So how will this affect global NGOs and development contractors? And if any of the other panelists is interested in answering, I'll just give you like a minute or two after Portia just to contribute to that. Thank you. Over to you, Portia.
Thank you for that great question, Jen. And I just feel like before I answer it, I just want to acknowledge, much like Peter, it was so interesting and honestly inspiring to hear from the other panelists. I feel like I was particularly taken by Steve Serra's really honest and transparent discussion of what the SAVE is doing and sort of the challenges that it's facing, and really taking up the hard work of pivoting the organization. I think, USAID has its own set of challenges to really pivot internally. So that really resonated with me, and I just want to thank him for sharing that. I feel like there were some really common themes that came out across the panelists. I didn't talk about the private sector, but it's a very important part of the work that the Center for Water Security and Sanitation Hygiene at USAID is doing. We are really focused on looking at the best bets, the best way to bring in the private sector to help us to accomplish both our, private sector bottom line outcomes and our WASH access goals. So I think that's really important. Clearly, all of the donor and IGO community doesn't have the resources that it's going to take to accomplish SDG 6. So we have to figure out how we can crowd in more resources. So hearing that and hearing about sort of the shift of both power and resources out to the field, whether it's at an NGO or at a donor organization, I feel like that was a common theme. So to me, it's really, it's heartening to hear that we're all taking somewhat of a similar approach to really make sure that this pivot to localization is final, right? That we're not just talking about it, we're figuring out how to put the money and the power in the hands of our local partners. So anyway, I just want to weigh in on that because I was so taken by the other panelists, and I really appreciated their comments. So in terms of thinking about, how NGOs and local actors can work with USAID and sort of the real story on the challenges and barriers to implementation of a localization agenda, I think I just want to, start off by acknowledging like our incredible benefits. And I think we all understand that it is necessary pivot in order to really accomplish the goals that we set out to do as a sector. But there is a lot more work to do to really come up with the solutions that help to streamline and reduce the management burden. For me, the challenges are manyfold. Working directly with local partners at USAID takes time. It's a high burden internally for our technical offices and for our contracting office, both in supporting our local actors, our local partners to get an award in place, and then all of the work that must be done after that to really implement. And I think while this might sound very operational in nature, when we're talking about moving the money out into the field, that means we're looking at local actors stepping up and serving as the primes so that they are receiving that direct assistance from USAID. And then they may choose to work with other NGOs or other companies, right, in a subcontractor, sub-awardee posture. And that's very different. And we have to think about building capacity. But if we're actually going to accomplish the goal of localization, that is the important key change that has to happen. It can't just be a local actor coming on as a sub. They have to be in the lead role. So in order to get that done, it takes time and it takes capacity. I mean, we've heard from the other panelists about all they are doing to build the capacity, both internally at the organization. We heard from the mayor in Haiti about the importance of building the capacity at utilities. I think it was super interesting to hear her comments on sort of the timeline to begin that infrastructure building and waiting. And I think that's the reality of what it feels like at the field level when you're looking to actually see progress. And we are talking at the sort of the donor level about concepts like systems approach and the importance of investing in the enabling environment and strengthening institutions and unlocking financing. But the truth is, the felt experience of that is that there's a gap. People are looking to see action and they're looking to see like concrete steps towards increasing access and service delivery. And how do we really marry those two concepts, right? How do we bring the conceptual discussion and our clear understanding of the importance of systems approach thinking into the reality of really like letting our local partners lead on that work and really engage? And what does it take to really close that gap? So to me, also, it's important to understand that it takes resources and it takes patience, right? That we need to think about opportunities for wraparound technical assistance to build the capacity of our local partners. And we need to really think about, and the agency is committed to do this at the highest level, right? Setting aside additional resources to tackle this need, the increased burden, both on the local partners and at the agency level. And also, I think it's important for us to really dig in and understand how many interested partners are out there in the countries where we work. How many WASH organizations that are local, whether they're private sector or public or nonprofit, are interested and ready to prime to receive direct assistance from USAID. When I engaged with our colleagues in the Kenya office for USAID, that was a question they put to me, that was a challenge that they acknowledged. While they've been responding to this call from the agency to really engage and work more with local actors, one of the challenges that we've encountered in the WASH sector is, do we really have enough actors in the sector who are interested in stepping up into that role? And if not, how can we help them understand what the opportunity is and how can we build their capacity to compete for this work? And just a very quick example from our Kenya office of the impact of localization internally at USAID. So the health office at the Kenya mission has now almost 90% of their mechanism portfolio is with local actors. But in order to manage that, the size of that office has had to nearly double. So that is the real impact of localization internally at USAID. And I think the agency is going to have to really, really face that reality and figure out how we're going to tackle the need to increase our own capacity. And so there are obviously clear benefits. It's work that we need to do. But I think another clear benefit is that it brings USAID closer to the work. When we're working hand in hand with our local partners, we're having more discussions about technical pivots. We're having more discussions about the real challenges of implementation, whether it's operational or technical. And we're really investing in building that capacity for the long term. And we know that's the key to sustainability. So that's a little bit from me on that question. I'll stop there, June.
All right, Portia, that's quite well answered. And I think Peter just wanted to add a little bit to what you're saying. So Peter, just go on and give us your opinion on this.
Okay, so I like what Portia said, that our effort is to find local primes, because that's how we build up the capacity. That's how we build up the local ownership. That's not easy. It's not easy because in fairness to them, they don't yet have that sort of practice. They don't have that experience. They may not even have the staff. But Portia, in answer to your question, are there local actors who want to do that? I think whether you're in South Sudan or in Nairobi, there are local actors who want to do it. Now the question is, do they have the capacity to do that? And I think this is, if I were in USAID's position, I would say you'll find the local actors there, and some may already have the capacity. They may even have better capacity than you find in Washington, D.C. But if they don't have that, then partner them up with somebody who does have the capacity. And it could be within the country, somebody who's in a different sector, but they know how to run a project, or it could be someone from Europe or the United States who can, in essence, I almost hate to use this terminology, but lead from behind. So that prime is the prime. They're the responsible party for receiving the funds, whether it's from US dollars or euros. They're responsible for receiving the funds, but there is somebody there to support them, okay? They're not left on their own. There's somebody to support them. So if you do that, if you're sending the money to a local prime and you have a partner, whether it's one of the Beltway bandits or you've got some strong local partner, what's really important is you set down the roles and responsibilities, who's doing what, so that when everyone signs that contract between the local prime and say an international NGO, that everyone is aware of who does what, and at the end of the day, the responsible party is that local prime, so that the partner, the very experienced partner, doesn't sort of consume the local prime, because that could easily happen, and then there's no capacity building if that goes on. So I think it's a great idea. There does have to be the support, and that support has to be codified in some kind of a contract that says, this is what you're doing, and this is what the local prime is doing. But I think it's a great idea. It just has to be done carefully, and it can be successful.
Great. I really like this discussion because it's offered people practical means of how to actually go onto the ground and carry out localization. So that's really good. And speaking of local primes, local partners, an interesting thing came up when Lucian, you put up the video from Haiti. So what about the initial expectations from the local government? I mean, you see the mayor in her video was talking about how she expected things to happen in a day. I mean, isn't this some sort of challenge that localization will face with, tempering or managing the expectations of the local partners, the local governments in how this new approach needs to be developed? So actually, I will direct this question to you, Lucian, and just ask you, how do NGOs and INGOs kind of need to manage expectations of local partners on the ground as, these localization efforts are now deployed?
Yeah, thanks for this very interesting question. I think expectation management is a big part of the systems approach that we apply. What we have to remember is that in a context like Haiti, municipalities do not have an active role in water and sanitation for now. They kind of get new infrastructures kind of served by NGOs. So of course they are just used to sit and wait and get the keys to the new systems, which then often collapse when the international NGO has left. So indeed, if we want to do a shift of role, a shift of posture of these municipalities who have to be leaders, who have to get trained to do all the work NGOs or other actors, national actors have been doing for them. It takes time. But I think that, as the mayor explained, once that you get into it, there is a big understanding that this is a much more sustainable approach. And not only sustainable in terms of networks, which can be constructed during the project phase, during the presence of the fundings there, but also something which can be upscaled, because we leave these municipalities with capacities to pursue the work beyond the project implementation, and also to kind of channel other funds through them, right? So in order that, let's say, another NGO comes and maybe with another approach, but they have the tools to explain the way or the vision of how they want to provide access to water and sanitation to their citizens. So I hope that answers the question. Maybe I just wanted to add to the discussion before with preparing right local actors to take up funds. I wanted to share that Helvetas, we really have a structured partnership approach, where we then, because there are different kind of partners, and we see partners which are part of the system, and we see partners which are local development partners. They are not necessarily part of the system, but they can, if we strengthen them, they can take over this role of guiding development as we understand it, the international development aid to this system. And these are partners as well, where we work with, where we develop shared visions of change, and try to develop long-term partnerships with them to implement together these development projects. So that was a small add to the previous discussion. So thank you, and over to you, June.
That's a necessary add to the previous discussion. And if any of the other panelists has something to add on that, because I think it's important, please feel free as I pose the questions to you. So I'm gonna ask Steve Sarah of Save the Children to take the next one. And there are two questions, Steve. So I really like that, Save the Children is doing the hard introspection of what, localization really means. So as we move towards this, what role, if any, do you see for global NGOs? Because of course, at the back of this, there's the slight fear that, will NGOs still have a relevant role if, local actors are really empowered and they can go on? How can we make sure that, global NGOs still remain relevant even with localization, and, dispel those fears that prevent the shift of power in this particular system and sector?
Thanks, June. Just from my personal perspective, I guess, I think what I see is that, you know, there will always be a need for the types of organizations that I represent, for example, like Save the Children. I mean, we have a huge domestic portfolio of projects across the US states. They look different. They're focused more on advocacy, on education, and on localized emergency response. And so they're not quite as multi-sectoral because we don't see like a huge WASH need, for example, or a huge need for immunization efforts, things like that, but they just focus on other technical topics and the needs of children in those locations. So I think there will always be a need, but the role will just look slightly different, and that it might focus on things that I think one of the things our current US and Europe-based staff are grappling with is that their roles may look quite different and maybe less interesting, frankly speaking. And so the organization in the future may not be the right fit for some of those staff because they will choose to move on to other roles with other organizations that are more interesting. But for our organization's health and for our priorities, we're making that move intentionally and openly with staff so that, like within my team, we're going to probably do a lot more proposals and strategy development and advocacy work and much less direct engagement with programs from the DC office.
Okay, I think that's quite a good answer because I think this is a fear, and I'm wondering if there's any other panelists who'd like to weigh in on this. Portia, do you have something to add on that? Because one of the main impediments to localization is this, kind of fear that, NGOs will be phased out, which really won't be the case. And so, of course, then people tend to hold on to that power. So I don't know whether you have a thought or two on that.
Yeah, I've got a thought or two. I mean, just a reminder that the USAID's goal is for 25% of its programming funds to go directly to local partners over the next 4 years. So at least 75% of its programming still available, open, and we need to partner with our known experienced partners. So I think there's room for everybody at the table. And I think there's multiple ways, I think to Lucian's earlier point about the work that Helvitas is doing. I think there are multiple ways for a donor or an organization to create space for more local voice and local leadership. And I think there are things that we need to do to invest, to build the capacity locally to be able to lead on these projects. Another specific approach that USAID has taken is to, in some of its procurements, start to require and encourage prime awardees to make sure that DCOP or deputy chief of party positions are for our local staff, or that we ask for a transition plan, and that if it's an expat chief of party, that over the course of the period of performance of an activity, there is a local chief of party that takes over. So I think it's those kind of small steps in our current procurement environment and our current awards, system, and the way that we program to achieve our WASH results. I think it's those kind of little things are important to achieving that goal, right? We've got to think about these pivots that we can create in our current environment to create space for a different future. So I hope that answers the question.
No, it's definitely a good contribution, Portia, and thank you for that. I think also Lucian, definitely from the Helvitas angle, you have something to say about this.
Yeah, thanks. Just wanted to add, that it's, of course, obviously a big question, especially for INGOs. But I think there are two elements. First of all, we see, and I think we all agree, that it's a necessary step to go towards this localization, or towards more like making these systems work, and that we really have to be extremely cautious to not substitute local actors. And I guess that's key in terms of the sustainability of the changes we want to achieve in our work. And at Helvetas, we don't see it that much as disappearing, maybe, but more a change of role. And we see this from going from implementing organization to maybe a facilitation, depending always on the kind of partnership, on the level of partnership we can have with our partner organizations. We try to go towards at least facilitation, so give more responsibility to these local partners and be more in a facilitation role. And maybe at some point we will be able to go much further and move towards more contribution, so be more like coaching, etc. Maybe a bit like, from what I understood, what Peter is doing. So I think it's a change of role. It's not that INGOs are not useful anymore.
Thank you very much for that. Just before I call on Peter, just to give his opinion, I think it's very good that you've mentioned a change of role, as exactly what Steve said. And then also, Portia, you mentioned more room at the table for more people. So nobody's disappearing. And then there's this African proverb, because I just had to bring it up. We go further when we are together, but faster when we're alone. So we will go further by, partnering and collaborating. So over to you, Peter. Why don't you add your voice to this discussion?
Great. Thanks, June. I just wanted to add something that Portia said with regards to, if we do need an expat in a position, whether it's a chief of party or deputy chief of party, in those situations, a lot of times you've got a very large project and you don't have any choice. You need someone with a lot of experience, particularly USAID experience, to be in that position. What Portia was saying is, all right, so you put that person in, but try and make them obsolete in a way, trying to phase them out and to bring somebody else into the picture who's local. And that takes a lot of the capacity building. So one thing I want to add on the capacity building that we as NGOs were never required to do. We're always required to do capacity building and training. And we always say that we're going to do that. And a lot of times we do a lot of that, but we're never really held accountable to it. Not as accountable as putting in a water system, or putting in a pipeline or a pump or something like that. And I think that's one of the things that's missing is, it's like if we go to university, right? We're held accountable to our capacity building. We get grades. We either graduate or we don't graduate. And I think one of the things that's missing in international development is trying to do a better job of measuring capacity building. For example, some form of certification at the end. Again, very similar to a learning environment, a university or college environment where you are tested to see whether or not you do it. I think as NGOs, we could be scored on our ability to do the capacity building that we said that we're going to do. And if we don't do it, that we risk not being fully paid. So if we're supposed to do capacity building and building up a DCOP, Deputy Chief of Party, or a COP, and we don't do that, or we don't do a very good job, and there's somebody at the other end who's not very well trained, I hate to say this because it could apply to Rock Blue as well, but we shouldn't be fully paid for that line item because we said we were going to do the capacity building. So I think that's one thing, not just USAID, I think it's just missing in general in international development, is holding people accountable for the capacity building, because it's so important and yet it's rarely measured.
No, Peter, you have put it well. Actually, you resonate with that document that I was reading, that one of the processes of localization could be that you have a key performance indicator for maybe the chief of party in this case, to show how they're delivering on localization as an aspect, or the country director, like how are they implementing it and they're measured against it. So that's a very good point and a practical way of actually implementing localization. Thank you for that, Peter. So I'm going to move to Steve. There's a question that we got directed to you. So how do we adapt, say, the children's localization strategy to WASH programming in remote pastoral communities like Karamoja in Uganda. So generally remote and pastoral communities.
Yeah, I think there are efforts underway. I mean, that is probably the context cited is probably one of the most difficult. In Karamoja, you know, there's very limited government presence, and there's not a big private sector for really any of the sectors that are there. So it's a really difficult effort. I know that within the projects that we're working on in places like Karamoja now, frankly, we're the sub on those projects. We're not the prime, but I would say as a consortium, where Mercy Corps is our prime partner, there's been a real effort to work closely with sub-county and county governments to build their capacity to regulate what's happening in the WASH sector. And there's a whole stream of work in those projects to formalize area service providers for water and sanitation services. And one of the other partners on the project, WAVE, which is a national local partner, they are responsible for doing a lot of that capacity strengthening work with the local governments. So you have WAVE, who's providing interim water and sanitation services, but they're also building the capacity of local governments. So I don't think that Save the Children can like claim credit for that work because it's our consortium partners that are leading. But I think it's a good model to, one, in the consortium have a local partner who's responsible for that work if they have the capacity, like WAVE does, and to have it written in the work plan and as measures of success, like you had just referenced, June, there has to be some metrics to how you've built or strengthened capacity of local institutions as part of measuring your success as a project. I will say though that the program there and in other places, we've seen struggles with not the technical capacity of local partners, but their operational and compliance and financial capacities to comply with donor requirements and with being transparent and flexible in the operational environments where they're working. And for that, I think we need to, as an international implementation community and a donor community, sort of like reckon with the balance between the level of risk we're willing to take in working with these partners and transferring funding to them, and what the potential outcomes or benefits are with that additional risk. In Save the Children, our managers, especially in our country and regional offices, are very financially risk averse. And I think that's something that we're trying to open discussions around to see when does it make sense to take a little bit more risk in the spirit of trying to give more power and more capacity to our local partners that we're working with and through.
I was on mute there, but thank you for responding to that, Steve. So I think now we'll go to the Q&A box and see some of the questions that we have there. So first off, we have a question from Habtamu. Hope I pronounced your name correct. Sorry, 1 second. Okay, so I'll just go to the question from Kyla Gregoire. So I really appreciate USAID's recognition on the importance of system strengthening and governance as the how of localization. I'd be grateful to hear a bit about how USAID is thinking about this on the humanitarian side and inclusions of system strengthening and governance on the humanitarian side within the grand bargain commitments. So I think I'll direct this to Portia.
Well, first, it's great to receive that question from Kyla, who was part of the USAID family up until, I guess it's been a couple of years now. So thank you for that, Kyla. While I do not work directly on humanitarian assistance, So I can't answer that question for, BHA or the Bureau for Humanitarian Assistance, but what I can do is share a little bit about what we on the sort of the DA side of responding to WASH needs in a fragile setting, what we are doing to enable ourselves to better support field missions. And that is, we are working to put in place a new mechanism that's called Fragile Waters. And if you've explored on USAID Business Forecast, you're aware of that. And that is really going to be a tool in which we can support local engagement and the important work of collaborating with local stakeholders and looking for opportunities to ensure that we can, where it's possible, close the gap and ensure that local populations are able to continue to get access to WASH services. That is a big pivot and a big step forward for our center to make our way into finding opportunities and approaches that work for us, that we can support on the development assistance side of things, meaning making sure that we can use our resources to support WASH access in fragile contexts, while still honoring and making and respecting the space of our colleagues who work on providing those services in an emergency immediate context. So I can say that we are now putting in place a mechanism, and we'll continue to do research under that mechanism and do assessments. And I think we're really looking forward to building our capacity and having a broader understanding of how we support local actors in that type of context. And that mechanism is going to be open to our field missions to be able to buy into and get access to that. So that's as much as I can tell you right now. I hope that at least gives you a sense of where we are, Kyla. Sorry, I can't speak directly to the HA side or the work that the Bureau for Humanitarian Assistance is doing, but I can take that question back and see if we can get an answer for you. Thank you.
All right, Kyla, I hope that you have received a response to your question, and thank you so much, Portia, for that. So I'm gonna push all panelists just a bit further to asking a hard question. So I've had a lot about fund transfer. I've had a lot about kind of employing or putting people, employing people from that region to stimulate local development. But I'm very curious about the power shift here. Let's to put aside the window dressing. How do we really make sure that local organizations and local entities are the ones that are making the decisions about how the funding is used? Like, for example, USAID, SDC, or even Helvetas, they come up with these funds, and then do you have the confidence to give a local organization the money and say that you come up with this, or do you have programs where you co-design? Because that's when real change starts to happen, when they actually have power. It's not just, we transferred funds, but we're really prescriptive in how you need to use it, or we've, kind of put these people in place and they need to do X, Y, Z based on our understanding. They have to comply with these guidelines. So I'm going to ask all the panelists to take like a minute to think about that, because that's the heart of the question. Are we ready to cede this kind of power to these organizations, and what will it take? So I see Steve is very eager to answer this. So over to you, Steve, as everyone else thinks of something. Thank you.
Well, I probably won't answer any part of your question, but maybe to expand on your question, I think one of the huge power gaps that I've noticed is that local governments in the WASH sector or other sectors, they often have absolutely no idea how much funding and in what sectors they're going to receive in their local administrative, locality. So like a district government will have very little awareness or almost no input on the design of programs that are gonna occur within their district. And I think that is a huge problem, because they're the ones who are, officially charged with development in their local administrative entity. And they can't do really any quality planning or prioritization for the the citizens that they're charged with supporting. And I wonder if there's any good models for bringing that information to them, and whether donors or implementing partners have ever worked with local municipalities, local governments to design and plan projects that are forecasted like through USAID or European donors. Because I know that the national governments are often aware of what's going to happen and where, but I don't think that information filters down very often to these local governments.
All right, I'm just gonna hand over straight to Peter, just to really expand on this question. And thank you so much, Steve. That is a good dynamic that has not been captured before, actually.
June, can you do me a favor? Just reiterate again what you were looking for, the question. I think I know, but I want to make sure I answer the right question.
Yeah, it's also a hard question to phrase, but no worries, Peter, I'll try again. So we've talked about transfer of funds as a way of, making localization happen. You've talked about employing people from that region, of course, like in the chief of party positions, country director positions, are slowly, having people in that region employed. But as much as they could be employed and funds have been transferred, there's this prescriptive overhead watching where they're told exactly what to do with the funds. They're not given too much leeway to co-design the programs. They're not given too much leeway to bring the priorities of the area into the process. They're just told, yes, you're in power, but you need to do this with the funds. And so then the question is, how do we bring about a true shift of power in terms of even decision-making, co-decision-making? And even as Steve said, in some instances, people at the local level are not even aware of the amount of funding available. This information doesn't trickle down to them. So I just want to understand how power in decision-making can actually shift.
June, are you referring to funds that might go to a ministry, to the Ministry of Finance, or are you referring to funds that might go to a local NGO or a local entity to implement?
I think we can broaden the scope. So it could be funds that go to a local NGO to implement, and funds that also pass through a ministry.
Okay. So if it's funds that go to the ministry, Portia's probably not going to like me saying this, but I like the MCC, the Millennium Challenge Corporation model, in how they do that. So there's a lot of sort of back and forth between the donor agency and the Ministry of Finance and the Ministry of, whatever water happens to be. There's a lot of back and forth, but at the end of the day, it's that local ministry that owns it. Now there's fiduciary mechanisms that are put in place to make sure that the money is well spent. This is taxpayer money. So I actually like that. I'm not saying that I like everything MCC does, and I don't think that Portia does either. But I think that one sort of collaborative effort where at the end of the day, MCC says, this is going to be your money. So you have the ultimate responsibility, but there's a lot of back and forth. Now, if it's giving money locally, I think that's risky. And I think that if you don't have that fiduciary oversight of the money that's given locally, let's say you have a large NGO in Kenya, okay, and you want to give them, say, $50 million to implement a water project. That's really risky. It's risky for, say, USAID or CETA or some other donor. It's risky for that entity that receives all this money, and maybe they've never had to manage that much money before, and it's going to ruin their reputation. So there's a lot of risks involved. But if you have somebody who's providing them with guidance, that has that fiduciary oversight, that's working collaboratively with them, and you've clearly identified the roles and responsibilities, this is so critical, is that if you're partnering with all the key partners, you have to sit down and go over the roles and responsibilities and make sure that people accept them, make sure that those to whom they report accept those roles and responsibilities, like a supervisor or whomever. But it can be done, and it should be done, because this is the only way that locally we're going to be able to build up that capacity. They want to do it. for sure, they need to do it for sure. That's how we're going to have sustainable results. But in the early days, there has to be the assistance. It's like throwing a student into a university without teachers. You know, they're not going to learn much, and they're going to get themselves into trouble. So I think it's doable. It just needs a little bit of oversight.
All right, Peter, thank you for that. And I think I'm just going to ask one more question as we now start to wind up. In terms of co-decision making, are there any other than the MCC model, which seems to be very interesting, but of course needs to be, improved? Are there any other co-decision making models between donors and local partners, maybe not even the government, even local partners, that any of the panelists know about, that perhaps our audience can go and refer to as they try and start to implement localization? Anything?
Happy to.
All right, Lisa, over to you.
Thank you. Maybe I'm not going to answer directly the question, but one thing I observe is that probably sometimes there is what's key is long-term partnerships, right? Because if you want to co-design something, if you want to do some changes in the system, you need to have trust. You need to have trust relationship, and to build up this trust relationship, you need to have time, be it at the national or be it at the local level. And I think for our project we are implementing now, Reglo, is a bit what happened. So Reglo, SDC, and Helvetas are present in Haiti for a long time. And this kind of allowed to, after previous phases of WASH implementation, it allowed to kind of sit together with national authorities and kind of co-design a new project, which is kind of groundbreaking as it goes towards decentralization, which is something new in the country, but to look at what has been working and what has not been working, and kind of try to identify together how we can design something new. And I don't think SDC would have been able to do that if they hadn't been involved in the sector for a long time.
All right, thank you so much, Lucian. And that is true. I think trust is quite foundational to the whole process of localization, both from the donors and the INGOs and the local partners. So I think we're ready to wind up the webinar, and I really hope that the participants have learned quite a lot. Just to summarize some of the main points that have been said by our panelists, and some of the key takeaways is that, first of all, the localization process is a process that will embed sustainability and change. But you need to be aware that it is not easy. It takes patience. It's gonna be a long process, and so people need to have that at the back of their mind. It involves system change, but it also requires a lot of innovation and a lot of guidance, as Peter said, when you're guiding these people and teaching them on how to develop these systems and strengthen their systems and roll out these programs. So at this point, I just really want to thank you and thank the panelists. It was a beautiful discussion. I personally learned so much, and I just want to hand over to Keith to close for us and to close what has been a very interesting discussion. Thank you.
Yeah, and thanks to you, June, for a fantastic job moderating, and to the panelists. Wow, so great to get these different perspectives. We heard about the strategic level, operational programming, and the aspect to me that really was so important to hear were some of the interorganizational intentionality and changes around this theme. We heard about USAID, we heard also about Save the Children in Helvetas, because that to me is really the guts of this whole thing, is how we make decisions in these issues of power. So we heard some really fantastic stuff today. So thanks everyone for making the time to contribute, and for those who participated. And again, so great to have MWA staff from all over the world tuning in today. So we're going to keep that going. So look forward to our next learning event later in the year. I'm guessing we might have to do something about localization again. There's so many elements of this to dig into. You will receive a post-event survey for those of you who participated, and would love to hear from you, what you heard. And we're hoping that you leave this better informed, but hopefully also challenged in how you take this back to your department or to your organization and think creatively about this. So thanks again for everyone. I will leave it at that, and we will have a recording of this in due course. But again, thank you to our panelists. Thank you, June. Well done. And everyone have a great day and keep up the good work where you are. Thanks.